Alright, you guys, so for this one, I'm going to just be completely straightforward with you guys and tell you that indeed I'm going to be doing this one open book just because there's a lot going on here and I want to make sure I get a lot of this right. So basically, let's go ahead and start here. We are looking at the pelvis. This is going to be your posterior, this is going to be your anterior view. So this one is if you're looking straight at me. This one's that I've got my back to you, so I'm going to say here, back. Alright, so that you guys can keep that straight a little bit. So, the first thing, and I think this is a good place to start, is going to be talking about this patellar tendon. So if I were to actually draw this really quickly, so if I've got my, and I've got this, and I've got my kneecap here, right? So the thing about the patellar tendon is that the patella is actually kind of underneath the tendon there. The tendon kind of goes through it and around it and kind of encompasses it, but it's really mostly there for leverage, right? So if we didn't have that patella there, we would have not much mechanical advantage to allow our leg to straighten back out. So the patellar femoral tendon, it's going to attach down here on the onto the lower half of the leg, but it's going to have 4 muscles that are going to feed into it, thus the quadriceps. And the 3 basic ones, which are all going to basically still attach to the femur here. You've got, it's kind of like this, right? And then you've got another one here, and another one here. So these 3 muscles are called your vastus muscles. And so, and they are so named based on their position, right? So this is going to be the lateral head of the vastus muscles, which is going to be the vastus lateralis, right? Vastus intermittus, which is going to be intermediary. It's going to be somewhere in the middle. And then you have your medialis, right? And those 3 make up the primary muscles of the quadriceps that go into there. Now you have one more. That basically goes right over the top here of your vastus intermittus, and then it's going to come up here and it's going to attach, I believe, just right above the hip here, and it says here the origin is the inferior iliac spine of the pelvis, so it's going to be up kind of here-ish, right? So this is actually a really important thing to understand for your rectus femoris, right? So if you guys have issues with anterior pelvic tilt, that's going to be one of the major players into that, right? And so let's go ahead and we're going to move on. So again, if you have issues that are happening within your leg here, whichever one of these muscles are tight, usually going to be one of these lateral ones or medial ones, right? They can, if your lateral vastus muscle tends to be tight, it's going to move your patella off to that side. So if you're starting to have patellar pain, it could be that your patella is starting to deflect either laterally or medially. It can also be pulled straight up, right, by your intermittus and rectus femoris. So it might not be sitting where it's supposed to anyway. So having tight one of these muscles, if we start looking at things analytically and saying, okay, where's the diversion happening? Where am I feeling discomfort and all that? We can decide which muscle needs to actually be loosened here. Now, the next muscle that I want to go into, let's go ahead and we're going to start, let's not do that one yet. We're going to go ahead and we're going to talk, let's say, iliacus, since we're already in iliacus. So we have a muscle that kind of comes up into here, right? And attaches on the inside of that pelvis there, and that is going to be your iliacus. And I want to make sure that I get the insertion of this correct. So it's going to come down and feed into this medial side of the femur. So one of the things that's going to happen with this muscle is when it gets tight, it's going to pull your body this way. It's going to tilt your pelvis to the front. So if you had a marble up here at the top of your pelvis and that muscle became tight, that marble is going to fall off to the front. If you have posterior pelvic tilt, where your tail tucks under like a scared dog, the marble will fall off to the back. So anterior, the marble falls to the front. Posterior, the marble falls to the back. So if I have a tight iliacus, I might, because it's attaching here in the medial side of your femur, And even more so if it actually wrapped around to the outside, it would actually be worse, right? Because if the origin is going to be kind of more of that medial side, as it will be with the psoas and the iliacus, it's going to cause some internal rotation of the legs, so your knees are going to kind of get knock-kneed there. And it's also going to pull your pelvis down, right, so that you get into the anterior pelvic tilt position. So that's pretty important. And that leads me into the next muscle, and I want to make sure that I get the insertion on this one correct. It's going to be a little bit higher, and it's going to be right here, right? So the insertion, the part, and when I say origin and insertion, origin is where a muscle is articulated, or is grounded, right? And then the insertion is where it's what joint is going to be articulating, right? So if I think about, so let's talk about these vastus muscles here, just for example here, right? They don't attach above the femur, so they just do that, right? So this is the joint that they are going to be moving. So because they're not moving the femur, they're moving the tibia and fibula, they are, their insertion is going to be that lower portion, their origin is going to be a higher portion. So, getting into this next muscle, which attaches here into the spine. That is supposed to be blue, that is very much so purple. And it comes down through here, right, over the front of your pelvis, and then attaches right into there, right? So it comes all the way through there. And that is your iliopsoas. And it's one of the, when people have low back pains, it's one of the muscles that I find to be the most common that's going to be overactive, that's going to be feeding into that. And a lot of times, relaxing that muscle is actually going to help with that. But there's more that comes into play than that, and we'll talk about pelvic tilt here in a little bit. But, so yeah, there's your iliopsoas. It comes down over the top of your pelvis to the front, and then feeds in near the top of your femur. So again, that can cause mostly adduction versus rotation of the femur, right? But it's going to be definitely pulling on your spine. And one of the things that it does is this, right? It's going to lift your leg up. All right. So, as far as anterior stuff, let's go ahead and talk about the medial muscles now. So for, let's try it real blue. For medial muscles, we have a bunch of muscles that are going to be coming off of the bottom of your pelvis here, and they tuck into these little testicle-shaped knobs here, right? And these are going to be your adductor muscles. Now, when we talk about our adductor muscles, again, they're going to be bringing that leg towards the medial line of your body. And so adduction means I add it to my body. Abduction means aliens take it away, right? Some people will say adduction to kind of make sure that you hear what they're saying, but I want you to really think about how that muscle is attached and what it's actually going to do. So if it's going to be a adductor muscle, it adds to your body. If it's an abductor muscle, it takes away. So another example of a abductor muscle would be like your deltoids, right? So here we have most of the adductor muscles. We don't really have to go into like a whole lot of detail on, and a lot of times people really skip over them. But so basically what we're going to have is we have just these muscles that come down here and they feed into here. And so those are going to be like your adductor longus, adductor magnus, brevis, the gracialis, right? That's going to be going all the way down to the knees. They're going to be your gracilis. And the pectinus is going to be like the highest one here. Now, the one that we kind of need to be aware of, because the adductor muscles don't really cause much in the way of rotation of the femur, they just bring them in together. There might be some internal rotations going to happen with those. The one muscle that we kind of, that plays a lot more into that is going to be the adductor magnus, which is the big one that runs most of your adductor complex here. And with that muscle, it wraps on the anterior and posterior sides of the femur, so it kind of cups around that. And so that one can cause internal or external rotation. So a lot of times, usually the big culprit is going to be internal rotation, because we've got a lot more that affect that internal rotation, which is kind of a byproduct of forced adduction as well, right? Internal rotation, right? Knock-kneed. So when we have that knock-knee kind of position of our knees, right, which generally is going to mean our feet are actually going to turn out, is going to be opposite of what's going on in the knees, right? When your feet are flat, your knees come together. So when that happens, usually our pelvis is going to tilt into anterior pelvic tilt, and there's going to be internal rotation. So when you have overactive adductors, it kind of helps aid in causing that internal rotation of the body. And then the last muscle that kind of plays into this is going to be your TFL, right? And so your TFL mostly runs vertical, right? But it attaches a little bit here to the anterior portion of the pelvis, and I want to make sure that I get that exact attachment right. Up there it is. So the origin outer surface of the iliac crest just posterior to the anterior superior iliac spine of the pelvis. In other words, it's like here, right? So it's really, really right here, and it's going to move a little bit to the outside before it feeds into your fuck me. So yeah, TFL's here. Your IT band, iliotibial band. So basically, this one doesn't really attach to the bone here. What you end up having here is this really long tendon that goes parallel to your leg, and it's going to attach right here. Okay, and so the thing about the TFL is you see that it has this kind of slight outward angle before it feeds into that IT band. And so when people have IT band syndrome or whatnot, you think about it, it's going to pull up on that IT band, making it feel tight. So a lot of times when you feel like, okay, I gotta foam roll this IT band, it's just not helping no matter how much I do it. This is a major tendon that takes, you know, lots and lots of weight. It's, I think it's what, 3,000 pounds is what it can take, right? Putting direct pressure on the side and foam rolling that is not going to do a whole lot of good considering those situations. What we need is we need to loosen the muscles. So if this feels tight, it means it's being pulled up to be tight, right? Coming straight up and slightly to the medial side. So when we have a tight feeling IT band, a lot of time it's this TFL up here that's actually causing that that funkiness there. All right, and so that is going to be pretty much your lateral musculature. Now we do have another muscle that's going to feed into that TFL. So if I come over here, I guess since I'm already doing that in orange, I'll stay with orange here. We have, and I'm just going to do this one lightly like this because that is your glute major, and it is a big ass muscle that kind of comes and feeds down into this IT band. Now, the thing is that the glute major is actually, glute major is going to be an actual antagonist to an extent of this TFL. So the difference between them is that the TFL kind of brings in, rotates in, and lifts up, right? It's a hip flexor. I haven't finished with hip flexors. I apologize. I'm going to go back in a second. But the glute major wraps around, feeds in that TFL. So what it does is it extends the leg and externally rotates. So that's what an antagonist is. Whatever one muscle does, another muscle does the opposite. So if we talked about the anterior tibialis, for example, and the soleus muscle. So the anterior tibialis causes dorsal flexion. The calf muscles cause plantar flexion. And I apologize that they are both flexions, and that's confusing. It has to do with the position of the fulcrum and where it's pulling in that fulcrum. So a lot of times I might substitute out and say, just for clarification, plantar extension, dorsal flexion, just because I'm extending my foot away versus flexing it back, right? So it's technically wrong for me to say it that way, but I think it actually clarifies a lot more. So yeah, the glute major feeds down into the IT band, which feeds down to below the leg, and it causes that external rotation and extension of the leg versus the adduction and internal rotation that we're seeing here. Now, one muscle that I had forgotten is the Sartorius, right? And so the Sartorius, the origin is the superior iliac spine of the pelvis, and I don't have color for that. So the Sartorius is interesting because it's going to come down this way, right, on the outside of the femur. It's going to cross over and attach here. So it's an interesting hip flexor. It's called the thinker muscle. And the reason for that is that once that muscle, because it's going from the outside to inside, once that gets engaged, it causes this, right? So it's kind of in this kind of position. So that's your Sartorius that allows you to do that. So let's get back to talking about your ass. So because the glute major is mostly an external rotator and it feeds into the IT band, we have two other major glute muscles there, and they are going to be your glute medius and your glute minor. And really, what I should have done here, and I'm going to do it now, is I'm going to draw you guys the top of your femur here, right? Because I think to understand these muscles, we have to kind of understand how they attach, and this is actually a little bit important, right? So you got a little divot, and then you have a little nub up here. So when we're talking about your glute minor and glute major, they're going to kind of feed in down here as well. And your glute medius, I said major minor, it's medius and minor here, right? Your glute medius does the same thing that your adductor brevis does, right? It's going to attach on the inside here of the femur, and it's going to attach on both sides. So the medius, the glute medius, can actually cause both internal and external rotation of the femur here. Whereas the glute minor comes to the front side, so the anterior side of the femur, instead of the posterior. So it actually crosses underneath and actually attaches more on the anterior portion of that. So when the glute minor becomes tight, you get that internal rotation, right? Whereas glute major is going to cause that external rotation, and then your medius does both. And a lot of times when we need to loosen up something, because internal rotation and knock knees are so much more common than bow legs, a lot of times what we need to do is we actually need to start loosening up that glute minor and the medius, right, specifically. And a lot of times, because the medius goes both ways, it's actually one of the ones that kind of gets really, really tight in there. So the other one, that's not helpful. So the other one that's really, really problematic in here, and it's really, really important for us to get this one right. So this is going to be your piriformis, and it's going to be attaching right here into the sacrum muscle, right, or sacrum bone that you have down here. So it's going to attach right into that guy, this guy here. Well, yeah. And so what that's going to do is it's going to go from the anterior position to the anterior to anterior. See, that's one of the things I get wrong. So it kind of goes across there. The thing about that is because the sacrum is in the posterior aspect of it, and then it crosses over the top of the pelvis, it crosses over a nerve there, which is the sciatic nerve. And so when a lot of times people have shooting pain that goes through the leg, they might have some odd stiffness down there, and they have this kind of sciatica. It actually has to do with this particular muscle here, right, the piriformis. And so, you know, a lot of people try to like get down in there with their with the femoral around the butt or a ball or something like that, and they really just end up kind of compressing that nerve there. And what we really want to see happen there is we actually want to start to stretch that. So we basically get into this thinker position on the floor with the back leg stretched out, and then we reach out to a 45-degree angle, basically the way our knees pointing, with our belly down, and just try to actually arch up rather than trying to get our head as low as possible, right? But we're trying to extend our bodies over that direction to kind of loosen that piriformis up. All right. we're going into the biceps muscles. So we're looking here, this is going to be your posterior aspect of your leg. And we have, just like in the front portion of it, we have 4 primary muscles that are going to go through the back side here. And I want to make sure again that I get this one correct, which is going to be your biceps femoris shorthand, which is going to be lateral. Okay, so basically we have kind of somewhere here on your femur, we have a muscle that's going to go bump, and that is going to be the short head of your biceps femoris, right? And it is the only muscle within here that only articulates one joint here, right? So the thing about that one is that when it gets tight and you start having issues on the lateral side of your leg, maybe you have external rotation issues, or I have to look that up really quick, but whatever. Since that one cannot be stretched easily, right? Because in order for you to stretch that muscle, you basically have to hyperextend your leg, right? You have to invert it, which isn't going to happen, right? You can, do this type of thing all you want, but because it doesn't attach to your pelvis, it can't be stretched that way. So really, foam rolling is going to be your best option there, or massage or something along those lines. So some type of myofascial release. Now, then we have the long head, which is going to feed into basically roughly the same place. It's going to cross over both joints. It's attaching up here at the pelvis. Now, I'm going to bastardize the names of these two, which is the semi-branumnosus and the semi-tendinitis. So the membranumnosus is going to be your most medial hamstring, right? It goes right down here, feeds in pretty much the same way. And then we have the other one, right, also here. So the reason why I kind of wanted to bring up all 4 of these and the way that they attach is because it's really, really important when we understand, okay, what are we doing when we are doing a hamstring curl? What are we doing when we are doing a deadlift, right? And so, a lot of times people think that a deadlift is this, right? I'm working my back. That is not a deadlift at all. Basically, what we're trying to do when we're doing a deadlift is we're trying to rotate the pelvis, right? We're going into like this extreme anterior pelvic tilt, but we're doing it, with a neutral back as much as possible. So we get into this posture here. We're rotating through here, and one of the reasons why I'm kind of conflicted personally about deadlift form, and I think part of this has to do with this idea that a stiff-legged deadlift is somehow bad for your back, and that comes into another concept that we'll go in more depth into later. But basically, you know how a lever works, right? So if I have a teeter-totter, right? Right. If I have a teeter-totter, boom, and these both weigh exactly the same amount on both sides, it's going to be balanced, right? If I go here and both these weigh the same, but you see the lever's shorter on this side goes down, right? This is incredibly fundamental, but and sometimes you might think it's painfully basic, but the thing is that people don't understand that weight, the further away from the fulcrum, which in this case is my shoulder, if I'm doing a front raise, the heavier it gets, right? So it's going to be lighter here than here because it's moving further away from my body. If I wanted to do a front raise and I wanted to lessen the resistance, I could bend my arm like that, and now that's the distance, right? So if I wanted to have less weight up here and I wanted to challenge the lower part a little bit more, I might bend my arm, right? That's more common, like if I'm doing a lat raise or something like that. But anyways, when we do a stiff leg deadlift, I think what people do is that they allow their arms to come forward, and when they do that, they're putting a lot more pressure into the fulcrum, which is going to be your pelvis, right? And you're putting here is the middle of the lever. So if you grab a branch and you go like this, right, where is it going to snap? Is it going to be over here at the base? No, it's going to be in the weakest point and the most bent point, which is going to be that middle point, right? So the further away my hands go, right, the more leverage that's going to be placed on my low back, the more likely I'm going to hurt myself. So if I'm doing a deadlift, right, I want to keep that weight close to my shoelaces the whole time, regardless of what kind of deadlift I'm doing. So if I'm doing a stiff-legged deadlift, right, I'm maintaining my back posture, I'm keeping my hands close to my knees, right? If I'm doing more of a kind of Romanian traditional deadlift style where I'm bending my knees, let's talk about what's happening there. And this is where I get a little bit conflicted about this, right? Is that all these muscles, right, when I am bending my knee, I am relieving tension off my hamstrings, the muscle that I'm trying to use, right? And so I'm bending it on one end while I'm lengthening it on the other. So basically the hamstring remains the same length throughout that. Does that make sense? So if I'm doing a stiff-legged deadlift, I'm going from my most lengthened position to my most shortened, right? And that's another reason why I squeeze my glutes and allow myself to go into that posterior pelvic tilt scared dog position at the very top, is because I'm forcing those hamstrings into the shortest position that they can possibly be in without necessarily, doing the leg extension to the back, because back can do it too. So if that makes any sense, right? If we're doing a hamstring curl, what we're doing is that we are basically kind of doing the same thing, but we're focusing a little bit more on this short head of the biceps femoris, right? Because it's not being affected by this, right? So I suppose that by bending your knees, you could hypothetically be saying that you're kind of alleviating tension from that short head of the biceps femoris, but really, either side that you bend on is going to work at least the three major heads of it. And since this one tends to be the short head tends to be tight on most people anyways, I don't think that we really need to focus on that one nearly as much. But that is going to be your fundamental difference between a deadlift and a hamstring curl, is it's going to affect that little one. Now, one quick note on hamstring curls, right? Basically, our bodies are not meant to necessarily pull this way with a machine with everything locked into a specific range of motion. And so what you'll tend to find when you're doing quadricep extensions and hamstring curls on a machine that says this is what this machine's for, we tend to feel a lot of discomfort in our knees, right? And it's because we're actually kind of grading that the bones and the cartilage there when we're doing those particular ones. So basically we want to be a little bit more stable or unstable, and we want to be a little bit looser so our bodies can adapt more. So doing hamstring curls on a physio ball or with a TRX are going to be the more safe ways of doing that. There's other ways that you could try doing that, like if you were to use sliders, right? Things that you put on your feet that allow them to slide on a floor, and use that as your resistance, and maybe even tie off your ankles with elastic bands to something and pull in. That would be a way that you could more safely do a hamstring curl. As far as quadricep extensions go, I don't think I've done it on a video for you guys yet, but Jet and I did it in a recent workout, and I did it with Robert recently, where basically you go through a walking quadricep extension, and it's going to be a lot safer, and it burns like crazy and it sucks. So anyways, guys, this has been a longer video because, again, this musculature is a lot more complicated than the lower musculature, and it's going to be actually kind of, other than the shoulders, this is going to be kind of one of the more critical areas to kind of really understand how everything attaches. So let's go ahead and we're going to move on to core.